There is an irony at the center of relationship advice, and John Gottman names it in the first pages of The Man's Guide to Women. Nearly every book about how to make love last is written for women. Yet the data he has gathered over 4 decades points the other way. What the man does is, by a wide margin, the variable separating relationships that flourish from those that fail. Writing all the books for women, he says, is like performing open-heart surgery on the wrong patient. The book is a collaboration among 4 authors. Gottman supplies the laboratory findings. Julie Schwartz Gottman, a clinical psychologist, the therapeutic experience. Douglas Abrams and Rachel Carlton Abrams, the latter a physician, the work on intimacy and the body. Their evidence base is the apartment laboratory at the University of Washington, the press named the Love Lab, where couples were videotaped talking, arguing, and living together while instruments tracked heart rate, blood flow, respiration, and perspiration. Facial expressions and vocal tone were coded in hundredth of a second increments, and couples were followed for as long as 20 years. The book is organized as a journey, understanding a woman, dating her, romancing her, making love to her, living with her, loving her for a lifetime, and uses a blunt shorthand throughout. The hero, who turns toward his partner, and the zero, who turns away. Chapter 1. What do women really want? The chapter invokes authority and dismantles it. Freud, after 30 years of inquiry, could not answer what a woman wants. Hawking, asked what he thinks about most, answered, "Women, a complete mystery." 2 rules then govern everything after. Every woman is unique, and where a particular woman contradicts the laboratory data, listen to the woman. The central finding arrives without hedging. The quality women rank first is not wealth or physique, but trustworthiness, defined operationally as being who you say you are and doing what you say you will do. The authors place this beyond sexual fidelity, which they treat as necessary but insufficient, and ground it historically. A woman's safety and her children's have depended on a partner's reliability, and where fathers are uninvolved, children are 5 times likelier to live in poverty. This is why the small chivalric gestures a grandmother would recommend carry weight disproportionate to their effort. Opening a door is not etiquette. It is a signal of protection, and therefore of trustworthiness. The lab interviews yield 2 symmetrical pairs of complaints. Women register 2, "He is never there for me, and there is not enough intimacy." Men register 2, "Too much fighting, not enough sex." The structural argument is that all 4 are causally linked, and one skill addresses them: attunement, set out as an acronym. Attend means undivided attention when asked for. Turn toward is meant literally, since the anthropologist Helen Fisher observes that men understand intimacy as working side by side, while women equate it with face-to-face conversation. Understand means questions rather than solutions. Non-defensively listen rests on the principle that any feeling is fact to the person feeling it. Empathize is emotional rather than intellectual. The lab finding attached is that the men who could down-regulate their anger were the men in the strongest relationships. The chapter closes with an observation that gives the abstraction a body. Watching 8-year-olds at recess, Gottman saw a boy start crying during a chase game. Another boy stopped everything, learned he never got the ball, handed it to him, and restarted play. Emotion was an obstacle to clear. The girl's version was structurally opposite. When Kathy cried during hopscotch over a beret she had hoped Lisa would wear as a token of best friendship, the conversation abandoned the game entirely and moved through how they met, plans for a sleepover and a scheme to marry brothers so they could become sisters. The beret was never resolved, hence the bottom line. For a woman there are no negative emotions and no purpose to being emotional. Emotions are opportunities for intimacy rather than problems to solve. Chapter 2. A Mind of Her Own. The authors refuse the stereotypes they expect the reader to arrive with. Held in the hand, 2 brains would not disclose their owner's sex. The functional differences worth attention are 2: rhythm and fear. Rhythm means hormonal cyclicity, and they name the Holy Trinity: estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, insisting on the third since testosterone is equally consequential for women. Their counsel on premenstrual symptoms is mostly restraint. Listen to the feelings, which are real whether or not the cycle is a factor, and resist attributing her state to it. The most cited evidence is a study tracking tips from approximately 5,300 lap dances, in which dancers earned roughly 80% more while ovulating. And dancers on hormonal contraception who do not ovulate showed no variation at all. The second half turns to fear and is the emotional center of the section. Lynn dragged her husband Mike, married more than 20 years, to a workshop where the facilitator asked the men whether they had ever feared for their physical safety. After a long pause, a few hands went up, and every answer was distant. A high school fistfight, a bad neighborhood a decade ago, Vietnam. The silence, the authors observe, was not discomfort but difficulty remembering. Then she asked the women, every hand went up. The last 6 months, every hand. The last week, every hand. Finally, how many were afraid walking through the parking garage to get here? Every hand, including Lynn's. Mike had never known Lynn experienced fear, having assumed her interior world matched his own. The laboratory demonstration comes from Lauren McCarter and Robert Levinson at Berkeley, who fired a gunshot behind volunteers. The startle reflex was identical across sexes. The reaction was not. Asked what they felt, women reported fear and men reported anger, some wanting to get even with the experimenter. The translation, a car cuts you off, you tailgate the driver, and the woman beside you, who felt fear rather than rage at the same startle, is made more frightened by your response. The chapter closes with the study giving the argument a physiological flaw. James Cone of the University of Virginia monitored women in an fMRI scanner under threat of shock across 3 conditions. In a happily married woman holding her husband's hand, the amygdala's fear response shut down completely. In a woman who did not consider the marriage happy, it dampened only partially. A stranger's hand produced nothing distinguishable from holding no hand at all. The instruction is plain, but the caveat is the more important half. The comfort works because of the relationship, so a man who has not built one cannot borrow the effect. Chapter 3. Read My Hips. The dating section opens with a story engineered to detach attraction from status markers. Sandra had dated Jonathan a few times without chemistry and nearly filed him under friend. Watching him command a table, fielding suggestions, deciding quickly, holding the room, she felt the spark for the first time. The table was a game of Dungeons and Dragons. In ordinary life, he was a part-time barista. He later became her husband. Social status, the authors conclude, is contextual, and they draw the distinction the reader will need. Confidence flows from security in one's abilities and attracts. Arrogance flows from insecurity and repels. The central and most counterintuitive claim concerns who initiates. The woman, the authors argue, controls whether a man approaches. She determines, often below awareness, which men to signal, and the man's decision, which he experiences as an act of will, is largely a response to a cue already given. Observational work by Lee Ann Renninger and Karl Grammer of the University of Vienna found that successful men were space maximizers who engaged in significantly more glancing behavior, meeting a woman's eyes, usually paired with a smile, since a stare without one reads as menace. The reciprocal case is Sonia, a woman of extraordinary beauty, rarely asked out because she does not emit approachability signals. Monica Moore of Webster University catalogued 52 distinct flirting behaviors across more than 200 women. Many performed unconsciously. When she scored a woman's nonverbal behavior, it predicted a man's approach with better than 90% accuracy. In the courtship dance, women are the choreographers. Chapter 4. First Impressions. The chapter opens at Gottman's expense. At 13, facing his first date, he sought instruction at the public library, found no book on dating, asked the reference librarian, and was asked to leave. He bought a book of 10,000 jokes and memorized 300. A friend supplied a theory that girls would not notice a hand moving slowly enough, and a plan involving an arm over a movie theater seat. Gottman told jokes continuously from Linda's doorstep to their seats, then executed the plan until his arm went numb and his hand landed with a thump. Linda flung it off hard enough to knock him from his chair. From the floor, he resumed telling jokes. Two failures are archetypal. He never considered the evening from Linda's point of view, and he arrived with memorized material rather than an invitation to converse. Hence the operating principle. Put the woman rather than yourself at the center of the encounter. The technical instruction concerns question design. Open-ended questions cannot be answered in a word or two and function as invitations. The worked example is the woman who says she is an attorney. The zero makes a lawyer joke, while the hero asks what made her choose law and what she loves about it. Then follows the answer. The chapter ends with a sobering pair of studies. Russell D. Clark III and Elaine Hatfield had a confederate of average attractiveness ask opposite-sex undergraduates to go out, come to an apartment, or go to bed. A great majority of men accepted the third, not one woman did. Martin Voracek's replication in Austria found a female rate not of 0, but of 6.1%. The point is selectivity, and the implication is patience rather than volume. Chapter 5. Making your move. The seduction chapter begins by deflating an advertisement promising a cologne whose pheromones will hypnotize a woman. The authors grant that pheromones are real chemical signals, then bound the claim, human pheromones govern attraction and a sense of rightness rather than sexual compulsion. For contrast, they offer the wild boar, whose females respond to androstenone in male saliva with exactly the abandon the advertisement promises. The distinguishing fact is that pheromones are not universal. For any individual, some people will respond and some will not. And the practical distinction that matters is that you cannot control your pheromones, but showers and clean socks are within your jurisdiction. Research at the Karolinska Institute found a testosterone derivative from male sweat activated the hypothalamus in women and in gay men, while an estrogen derivative from female urine activated it only in heterosexual men, from which the authors draw the limitation that no dating platform can predict how two people will smell to each other. The second half turns to philematology, the science of kissing, and the stakes assigned, the first kiss are high. From John Bohannon of Butler University, they report a survey of 500 people comparing memories of significant life experiences, including the loss of virginity, in which the first kiss emerged as the most vivid, with respondents recalling 90% of details, regardless of elapsed time. From Gordon Gallup, they report that 66% of women say they have ended a relationship over a kiss that went badly. Their guidance is principles rather than script, hygiene first, then confidence, then reading nonverbal signals rather than asking permission. The chapter ends by deliberately declining to proceed, arguing that judgment is compromised precisely when oxytocin is highest. Chapter 6. Is she more than a hookup? This is the book's exercise in applied skepticism. The moment a man most wants to make a judgment is the moment he is least equipped to. The mechanism is oxytocin, released during orgasm and also by affection of entirely non-sexual kinds, and the claim is not merely that it feels good, but that it impairs decision-making and suppresses fear. At the University of Zurich, participants played a trust game in which shared money tripled, and the recipient chose whether to return a portion. All were then told they had been cheated. Those given a placebo reduced what they would entrust afterward. Those given oxytocin by nasal spray continued sharing at the same rate. The betrayal changed nothing. And brain monitoring showed reduced amygdala activity. The authors then introduce limerence, the hormonal state of early attraction, and their interest is in its cost. It makes warning signs invisible and, worse, produces the confident sensation of thinking clearly while not doing so. Their illustration is fatal attraction, and the reading is pointed. It was not the affair that turned Alex into a bunny killer. She was one from the start, and Dan declined to see the signs. Attached is an assertion repeated across the book. People do not change. The practical core is reading her true profile under heart, mind, and body, with attention to how she treats pets, friends, and family. They pause to define neurotic in its technical sense as one or both of two cognitive styles, seeing potential negativity everywhere and ruminating endlessly on small negative events. 4 character sketches follow: the damsel in distress, the princess, the competitor, and the drama queen. with the clinical shadow named behind each. Chapter 7. Image is everything. The authors open the section on physical intimacy by refusing to begin with anatomy. Before the body can be understood, a woman's relationship with her body has to be. The statistical spine concerns saturation. Women view between 400 and 600 advertisements a day, roughly 1 in 11 carrying a direct message about ideal feminine beauty, so that by 60 a woman will have absorbed some 6 million such messages, against a standard that is unattainable, since the images have been manipulated to the point where the models themselves do not resemble their published likenesses. The structural argument is that a woman does not experience herself as separate from her body, and so defines her worth in terms of it. Beauty functions as a survival strategy. The asymmetry they identify is that she does not feel she can build beauty the way she can build strength, knowledge, or a resume, and the media message is that it will only deteriorate with age. When women take a long time to get out the door, the authors write, it is not vanity, but a response to the reliable fact that they will be treated differently according to how they look. The most effective passage is a story from Gottman's early career. Admitted free to a Kinsey Institute workshop on condition he run one group session of 12 people, most of them sex therapists, he had each describe how they felt about their body and select one part. Looking at an unusually attractive group, he expected a dud. He was, in his own account, badly wrong. Every one of the 12 hated their bodies. The invitation the authors extend to the male reader is direct. Take the preoccupation you have with one part of your own body and imagine feeling it about every part, continuously. The practical conclusion is a causal chain. A woman's desire depends on feeling desirable, so lovemaking begins long before the bedroom. The greatest sexual organ a woman has, they write, is her mind. Chapter 8. Her body is a wonderland. The anatomy chapter opens by restating that anatomy alone explains nothing. Passion begins in the mind, and a woman's mind and heart are her most powerful erogenous zones, which is why the book opened with attunement rather than a diagram. She needs to feel emotionally and physically safe before she can be sexually safe, and encyclopedic knowledge of nerve endings is inert without that foundation. Embedded here is a claim about responsibility that cuts against a common assumption. The authors name as a myth the belief that a woman's failure to reach orgasm indicates a man's failure as a lover, and assert that ultimately a woman is responsible for her own sexual pleasure. The man's responsibility is different in kind, to help her get there and to understand how a woman's body actually works, not the same as his own and not the same as what is depicted in pornography. The educational premise is a documented gap. They cite a BuzzFeed exercise in which adult male readers were asked to label the female reproductive diagram standard in junior high health classes and describe the results as both hilarious and atrocious. On the clitoris, the authors are emphatic. It carries as many nerve endings as the head of the penis in a far smaller space, which is why clitoral stimulation is the most reliable route to orgasm. They treat the lettered locations with skepticism, tracing the G-spot to Ernst Grafenberg, who described it in 1950. Their aside being that crediting him with the discovery resembles crediting Columbus with America, since both were tolerably well known to the locals beforehand. The chapter closes with a section titled The 99%, which is its real argument. There is not a part of the body that cannot become an erogenous zone if touched the right way, and the corollary they call the big secret of the bedroom is that a man's pleasure comes from hers. Chapter 9. Becoming Her Best Ever. The chapter opens with the book's most quoted image. At a seminar led by Paul Gebhard, one of Kinsey's collaborators, Gottman watched films of animals mating: elephants, horses, camels, zebras, almost all of it fast, none of it looking enjoyable, until the porcupine. The male porcupine has an obvious problem since his partner is covered in quills. His solution is to sit in front of her, place his paws on either side of her face, and stroke it slowly and repeatedly. She closes her eyes. He continues. Periodically, he checks whether the quills have lowered, and if they have not, he returns to his post and resumes for as long as it takes. The verdict is unambiguous. The male porcupine is a hero. The authors reject the familiar formulation that women need emotional connection to have sex, while men need sex to feel connected, proposing instead that men simply have fewer prerequisites, supported by the observation that gay male couples report the most sex of any couple type and lesbian couples the least. Female desire functions as a barometer of whether she is happy, rested, and supported. The most consequential study comes from Sandra Byers and Larry Heinlein. Men initiated more often, but there were no differences in how men and women responded to initiation, with both responding positively about 75% of the time. The summary is that a man should ask, on refusal, do not take it personally. A sidebar addresses trauma and sexual abuse with unusual care. The essential message to a survivor is that you are different from whoever abused her. The authors introduce the term enduring vulnerabilities for bodily locations that can reactivate memory, and their instructions are unambiguous. Touch only as long as she is experiencing pleasure, stop immediately at pain or numbness, discuss beforehand which parts she does not want touched, and let her guide the pace. A second sidebar specifies the problem with pornography. It is built around a male fantasy and the rhythm of male masturbation, and in it women reach orgasm continuously through intercourse alone, whereas in reality only about a third do so without additional stimulation. The other substantial finding is Meredith Chivers's work on the discordant effect, the gap between genital engorgement, a physiological measure, and actual desire, a psychological one. In men, engorgement coincides with desire only about half the time. In women, only about 10%. Physiological interest does not amount to desire. On attention, they return to the smile, distinguishing the genuine Duchenne smile, originating at the corners of the eyes rather than the mouth, from a manufactured one. The only way to produce a real one is to actually think about the affection you feel, and if you cannot generate the feeling, that is itself information. The chapter ends on afterglow with the simplest instruction in the book. Hold her before sex, during and after. Hold her when she is upset, happy, frightened, and when she feels unworthy of being held. Chapter 10. Learn to fight like a girl. The chapter connects the two male complaints from the first chapter. Men want less fighting and more sex, and these are a single causal chain. Despite the folklore of make-up sex, conflict suppresses desire. The headline is stark. A woman will not have sex with a man she is angry at, or who has failed to hear whatever is upsetting her. Bullying, reasoning, logic, and negotiation may serve at the office and the poker table. There is no place, they write, for shock and awe in resolving a conflict with a woman. Conflict does not require a cause. Drawing on Paul Ekman's term regrettable incidents, the authors report that most such incidents arise from nothing in particular. James Averill found no real difference in how often men and women become angry. The difference lies in management. Sandra Thomas of the University of Tennessee led the women's anger study, which located the causes in 3 categories: powerlessness, injustice, and the irresponsibility of other people. The core contribution concerns flooding. Men become emotionally flooded in conflict more than women do, and once flooded, only the men who could reduce their heart rates were able to reduce the criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling they contributed. The 4 behaviors Gottman calls the 4 horsemen. Escalating with any of them carries an 81% chance of ending the relationship. The scene is domestic. She wants to talk about a co-worker who took credit for her idea. He turns on the game. Then comes the sentence, "You're not listening to me." Men hear this as criticism when it is a bid for connection, and 4 wrong responses branch from that moment. Ignoring it is stonewalling. Insisting you are listening without looking away is defensiveness. Suggesting she quit the job is contempt. Telling her she is always negative is criticism. The physiology has a name: diffuse physiological arousal. In a study of more than 3,000 couples, the authors found it impossible to communicate in this state. The threshold is a heart rate above 100 beats per minute, at which a man loses access to his sense of humor, hears poorly, and repeats himself. They state without softening it that flooding is the key variable in low-level domestic violence. The evolutionary account is symmetrical. Men descend from males selected for vigilance, and the trait remains even when the threat is a sentence rather than a spear. Women descend from females who nursed infants, which required the ability to self-soothe. The practical implication is memorable. Women can swim in the same sea of conflict in which most men will drown. The remedies are 3. Breathe, which stimulates the vagus nerve. Count to 10, and if neither works, take a break, with a sharp distinction between a break and flight, since leaving without a word reads as abandonment. The break must run at least 20 minutes, and the counterintuitive finding is what to do during it. A man's heart rate did not drop when he thought about his wife's negative qualities, and surprisingly, did not drop when he spent 20 minutes on her positive qualities either. What lowered heart rate was reading a magazine. What is needed is distraction. They report that couples experiencing domestic violence characteristically have no exit strategy, and estimate roughly 80% of such violence stems from the absence of a way to calm down. The final section addresses what to do once calm. Roughly 40% of the time, when a woman raises an issue, men have no idea what she is talking about. Heroes decline defensiveness and look for the pain underneath, supplying 3 questions. What do you need? What are you concerned about? What are you feeling? Their image for why avoidance fails is good. Each unaddressed conflict becomes a stone in your shoe, and eventually you cannot walk together. Chapter 11. Why does it take so long to buy a pair of shoes? This is the book's lightest chapter and its most speculative, and the framing is candid. Shopping is a common source of conflict. The trait will not change, and understanding it avoids a fight that cannot be won. The explanation is evolutionary. Women were the gatherers, foraging daily for firewood, berries, roots, and medicinal plants, which required an excellent memory for detail and cooperation with other women. The contrast comes from Rob Becker's play Defending the Caveman. A man shopping for underwear hunts it, kills the one pair, and returns home with his kill, while a woman goes forth to see what there is, in a process that is social rather than solitary. The memory claim is the empirical center. Subjects were left alone for 20 minutes in a room containing roughly 100 everyday objects, then asked to write down everything they had seen. Men recalled about 7 items, women about 20. The authors then narrate a genuine reversal in the literature. Eleanor Maccoby and Carol Jacquelin's The Psychology of Sex Differences reviewed the memory studies and concluded there were no real differences as part of a broader effort to debunk stereotypes, while some 30 years later, Elizabeth Loftus reviewed the same studies plus roughly 20 more and concluded that women's memories are superior, particularly where what is remembered has social context. The final section is the most contestable. The authors cite a longitudinal study by Peter Bentler and Michael Newcomb, which they report found the best predictor of whether marriages would last was a woman's clothes consciousness. The practical counsel is deflationary. Do not criticize her for shopping, and if you hate shopping, do not go. Chapter 12. Best Friends Forever. The friendship chapter argues that a man entering a serious relationship has also entered a relationship with her friends, and that female friendship operates at an intensity most men misread. The comic illustration comes from Dave Barry, who described an annual visit with another couple during which the women went off together while the men watched the playoffs and became emotional chiefly about the pizza. On the drive home, Barry's wife remarked how well Harry had adjusted to having his leg amputated the previous year. Harry had not mentioned it. The substantive claim is that women get something from female friends that a partner cannot supply, and the evidence is unusually strong. A 2006 study in the Journal of Clinical Oncology, examining approximately 3,000 nurses with breast cancer, found that socially isolated women were twice as likely to die from their cancer as women with close friendships, and had a 66% increased risk of premature death from any cause. Friendship was the single most important factor, more important than having a spouse, which showed no effect on cancer survival at all. For men, the pattern inverts. The Alameda County study, conducted by Len Syme of Berkeley and his student Lisa Berkman, followed about 9,000 people for 9 years, and found that the predictor of early death was not cholesterol, exercise, or diet, but the quality of a person's closest relationships, and that the predictor differed by sex. For men, it was whether they were married. For women, it was friendship with other women. The summary is compact. If you want to live a long time, keep your relationship happy. If you want your partner to live a long time, encourage her friendships. The most serious passage concerns jealousy. In the author's research on domestic violence, a common denominator among violent men was jealousy of a partner's female friends and attempts to isolate her. The hero is not threatened and does not attempt to control whom she sees. Chapter 13. Is She the One? The commitment chapter opens with the author's own testimony. Gottman describes Julie not as the most beautiful or agreeable woman he had known, but as an outlier among them, and it was the difference that told him. Two corrections to conventional wisdom follow. Men want commitment as much as women do, and not all women want the picket fence. A more sobering claim underlies the chapter. From over 40 years of research, the authors conclude you cannot make it work with just anybody. Couples can be taught every skill, and if there is no inherent rightness, no skill set compensates. The organizing structure is 3 stages of love. Stage 1 is limerence, highly selective and the driver of bonding. But even when mutual, it is not the time to make a lifetime commitment, since oxytocin lowers the fear response. They add an anthropological qualification easy to miss. Limerence is not universal, and in cultures with arranged marriage, a great deal of selection nonetheless occurs. 2 families in India may arrange for a son and daughter to meet alone, and if the woman is not interested, she may change from the blue sari to the yellow one, with the families attributing the mismatch to ill-fated horoscopes. Stage 2 is trust, where all the arguing reduces to one question: will you be there for me if I need you? Stage 3 is loyalty and chosen commitment, and couples who reach it consistently express a sense of purpose, that together they have made something larger than themselves. The chapter's answer to how you know is anti-romantic. There is no single one. The authors estimate there may be 10,000 people with whom a satisfying lifelong relationship is possible, and the test is how she makes you feel. They dispatch the compatibility myth directly, reporting similarity of interests is mostly irrelevant. You may both claim to love kayaking, but if you argue going down the river, the shared interest is worth nothing. The exception is what they name meta-emotion mismatch, 2 people relating very differently to anger, sadness, fear, and the expression of affection. The chapter closes with an unfashionable claim. In Pepper Schwartz and Philip Blumstein's American Couples, a study of more than 12,000 couples, researchers expected cohabitors to grow more like married couples over time, and found the opposite. The longer a couple cohabited, the less they resembled a married couple on commitment. Chapter 14. Mother Nature. The chapter opens with an act of civil disobedience. In 1960, in Arcata, California, a 23-year-old student named John Quinn was told he could not attend his wife's delivery. He wrapped a heavy chain around his wrist and hers and attached 2 padlocks. The staff called the police. The baby was delivered with Quinn at his wife's side. Afterward, he unlocked himself and walked past the officials waiting outside, and no charges were filed. Until the mid-1980s, it remained illegal in places for a man to attend the delivery of his child unless married to the mother. Today, 91% of American men are present, and the claim attached is empirical. Men present at their children's deliveries are markedly kinder to their wives during disagreements than men who are not. The emotional argument concerns displacement, and the authors put the hard part plainly. The woman you love has fallen in love with someone else, who cries constantly and has worse bathroom habits than you do. The only solution offered is not reassurance, but action. Develop your own bond with the child. The theoretical frame comes from the psychiatrist Daniel Stern, who described the motherhood constellation. The matrix a pregnant woman assembles of people who will support and validate her new maternal identity. The strongest section concerns paternal distinctiveness, and its argument is that fathers should not attempt to be second mothers. A father's play is more physical, a mother's more visual and verbal, a contrast they summarize with T. Berry Brazelton's phrase that mothers stroke and fathers poke. Their Love Lab video gives the illustration. A mother shows a 7-month-old a picture of a giraffe, asking who is tallest in the zoo. The baby crawls away. She circles around and shows him again. He crawls away again. She persists. Mom, they write, is the baby's patient teacher. A father drops a game the moment interest lapses. Seeing the baby look at a toy truck, he begins making truck noises and becomes the truck. Through that process, babies learn to self-regulate. Mothers are teachers, fathers are guides, babies need both. Robert Sears at Stanford studied 300 families when the children were 5, and 26 years later, researchers assessing the same people as adults found the best predictor of adult empathy was how involved the father had been at age 5. Chapter 15, Staying Together. The final chapter opens with Einstein, and the choice is deliberate. The greatest mind of the age was as lost as anyone about keeping a woman. In 1914, with his marriage collapsing, he presented his wife Mileva with a written list of conditions. That his laundry be kept in order, that 3 meals be delivered to his room, that his desk be reserved for his use only, that she expect no intimacy and offer no reproach, stop talking to him on request, and leave his room immediately without protest on request. A few months later, Mileva took the 2 children, left and filed for divorce, receiving every cent of his Nobel Prize money. The first rule follows with evident enjoyment. Do not ever give her a list of demands. The second is the difference between a hero and a zero. Never think you know everything there is to know about her. The substantive core is trust, and the authors are candid that its centrality surprised them. Unhappy couples said outright that trust was missing, that they could not count on their partners when they most needed them. Successful couples said mutual trust made them feel safe, which enabled vulnerability, which deepened love past the initial infatuation. Their strongest claim is that distrust and betrayal sit at the heart of every failed relationship, even where no affair has occurred, and even where the couple does not recognize distrust as the problem. Their account of how betrayal develops is the most useful passage, because it locates the danger in avoidance rather than conflict. What makes a relationship most vulnerable is avoiding conflict and concealing parts of yourself to keep the peace. A gradual pattern of conflict avoidance produces emotional distance, and emotional distance sets the conditions for an affair. The example is deliberately small. She has argued with her best friend and is upset, and you either attune or you turn on the television because you prefer the kind of drama that comes with commercials. Each failure forms a crack. Enough cracks and the house comes down. Betrayal does not arrive out of the blue, but is a long, almost glacial slide built from secrets, unexpressed needs, and moments of connection missed or dismissed. Turn away often enough, and she will not be there when you finally turn back. They then compress the entire book into a formula. Hero exceeds zero, because the hero turns toward his partner and the zero turns away. The practical program for affair proofing is 5 items. The 6-second kiss at every parting and reunion, on the grounds that oxytocin begins to flow and trust is built. A weekly date night, planned and anticipated. Continued open-ended questions, since there are still things to learn. Daily expressed gratitude, which functions as money in the bank that makes forgiveness likelier when he inevitably does something foolish, and honoring her dreams, which the authors treat as most serious. They report research that the longevity of a relationship depends on each person supporting the other's goals, and warn that a man who does not actively help his partner pursue her dreams will end up living with a woman who is depressed and beaten down. What the reader carries away is a single idea in many registers. Attention is the substance of love rather than its decoration. Trustworthiness is attention made reliable over time. Attunement is attention given the moment a bid is made. The 4 horsemen are the 4 ways of withholding it under pressure. And the physiology of flooding explains why withholding feels so necessary just when it is most destructive. Turning toward and turning away are the same act at 2 scales. The 6-second kiss at the door and the 20-year marriage are made of the same material. The book's best contribution is that it makes this concrete and testable rather than sentimental. It gives a man a heart rate, a 20-minute break, 3 questions, and an instruction to hold her hand. Its limitations deserve naming as fairly as its strengths. The evolutionary explanations are the softest material. When the authors move from what they measured to why our ancestors might have been that way, the confidence outruns the evidence, and the shopping chapter is where this is most visible. and the frame itself, hero and zero, women as a foreign country requiring a guidebook, buys accessibility at the cost of treating a woman as a category with a manual, rather than a particular person, even though the authors say plainly in the first chapter that where the data and the woman disagree, listen to the woman. But the deepest thing in it is one the authors reach almost without arguing for. Their whole apparatus, the sensors, the coding of faces in hundredths of a second, the 20-year follow-ups, converges on the conclusion that a person becomes most fully himself, not in isolation but in obligation to another. The longevity findings are the sharpest form. The isolated man dies early, and the married man lives 8 years longer, not because marriage is a health intervention, but because a life ordered towards someone else is the kind of life a human being is built to live. Freedom, on this evidence, is not the absence of commitment. It is what commitment makes possible. The book arrives at this by way of heart rate monitors and mortality tables, which is a strange road to a very old destination, and it does not quite notice it has arrived. But it has. Read the whole book. The research is worth encountering firsthand, and the porcupine alone is worth the price.